Hey there, Mike. I
Hey,
was
Brent,
seeing
how
you
you doing?
show up early. You must have had a meeting change.
Yes. Yeah, too many internal conflicts seem to be clearing up though now.
Nice.
To be
Good to
more
see you.
specific, we have a project called Jumpstart where I get to train up as many people show up to be open source programmers. And last quarter we had 150 sign up, and there was like 30 were interested in the container and Kubernetes stack. So yeah, those calls just happen to overlap. So
What's the breakdown of people that are curious about containers versus curious about Kubernetes?
how do you do one but not both? You know,
I,
we
I
we do sometimes here in OCI land, but really in reality land, pods exist. I'm going to keep pushing. We need.
I just think some people look at it and they're like, this whole Kubernetes thing is where all the action is. I should get on that. And then they jump into it and they're like, this whole Kubernetes thing is really complicated.
Well, I think it's more than that, right? In my view, it's more about orchestration. Just like Docker had that view way back when, right? How many different ways can we do orchestration? Kubernetes is one of, and what I'm seeing in the AI space, right, is everybody wants to do some kind of orchestration, and they have different models like OLAMA, how it works, right? I mean, there's just so many different ways to do it, to slice it up, if you will, to slice up access to the sliced hardware, right? And yeah, and then when they want to go cluster it, distributed, then they want to talk about the more popular orchestrators where they can maybe run their hosted pod in a VM that's doing the things that they like to do, how they like to do their own acceleration. Um, so yeah, AI is the AI models, if you will, are definitely setting up a whole new ways to do pod like things or container like things, you know, either in or out of the VM. Sometimes they're just bare metal nowadays, right? Because people just want to run, they just want to run the tools on those nodes, right? Maybe in a VM, but maybe not. It's a different space. I'm just saying. And then they want orchestration. And sometimes the orchestration is in an HPC model, and that's okay too, I think. And we just need to find ways that we're going to use those resources, cloud based or not, right? It within Kubernetes clusters, they're being managed as a PaaS or an IaaS. It's an interesting spin on what's going on. It's fun. Either way, I think we need more work in OCI around this concept of sets of containers. If not also resource man, more descriptions of resource management. We've got some good stuff. I know Samuel's got some great ideas. I'm glad he's here today.
When you start jumping into HPC, I start thinking of Singularity.
There's a lot of variant implementations. lots, lots. I was going through the Olama code just yesterday, and I was like, boom. They're doing so, but they're not sharing a lot of the OSS code, and not in what I've seen. People are rolling their own, still working with registries, but because they're not sharing code in like GitHub com containers or in some other path like out of container D or whatever, right? They're missing some of the parts. They only work with certain registries. They don't even have OCI support. Like,
I
okay,
saw I saw some kind of link, I forget where, but the OpenTofu project starting to add containers on their side, and I'm like, cool. And I go look, and they've written it all themselves. I'm thinking,
yeah.
I feel bad for them.
Yeah, it's. I mean, in a way, it's cool. In a way, it's like okay, more people to bring into the fray if needed. A lot of them are using think think TNMs here are using Docker sample kind of code, right? Sometimes they'll use Docker run, sometimes they create their own run.
These the OpenTofu, since they're putting artifacts on the registry, they wrote their own their own registry interface.
I know. It's like,
So
and you can, and you understand why a little bit. I mean, they want a whole ecosystem, right? Um, like Hugging Face. If you're looking for the ecosystem and you're managing the distribution of content, it makes sense, I guess, to not necessarily open up that back end to just anywhere. Yeah, it's interesting. And then they'll get themselves into Kubernetes scenarios, and they'll have alternate, paths probably is what I'm saying.
yeah,
But yeah, like the Olama thing. I'm looking at Olama and Ramalama over on the Red Hat side, where they're having support for Olama and other paths, and it's cool stuff.
Ramalama sounds like it's made up. I don't believe that's a real thing.
Okay. Dan, the man has, he's good at naming. He makes popular names for things like Podman, right? He's pretty good at that stuff.
That
And he's an expert in SE Linux, so I got to hand it to him sometimes.
Ramalama has to be the name of a conference, not a name of a product. Oh boy.
It does sound like a song. What was that? Like an Egyptian.
Oh boy.
For some reason, that's what I'm thinking of. They're like substitute Ramalama, yeah, and then never mind.
Bringing back some childhood memories there.
I know, right? Hey, Brian.
Well, I thought about picking on Tianon earlier and like, do we want to jump into what annotations mean and all this stuff? But I'll leave
Oh,
that in another discussion.
oh.
Um,
Yeah, we need to map those annotations, I think.
well, it's
Yeah, sorry, Brandon, I
annotation.
got to drop.
Oh God.
Yeah, if anybody wants to dig into that one, I kind of started poking them on the annotations set on some of the Docker official images are set on the descriptors of the various entries of a manifest list of a OCI index, but they're not set on the index itself. And so I'm going back and forth on that one in some back channels, but I will spare the team that discussion. But I only threw one thing on the agenda. We can chat about other stuff if you want to chat about other stuff. But the thing I threw on the agenda kind of came through a roundabout path of looking at how we can better, and I might have just lost all my video and stuff. Am I still here?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Video and everything just went blank on me for a second. Still on my other screen too. So the path I was looking at was how we can better support OCI layouts that have multiple repositories in a single layout. And I started looking through it, some of the stuff we were working with the namespace code for the pull-through proxies, and thought those two things are playing in very similar spaces. Is there a way to make them overlap nicely? And so that's the method of my madness for what I'm looking at right now. Is there a good way to make those two play nicely in the same sandbox? And so I'm looking at the namespace parameter for the pull-through proxy and saying, should that only be on pulls? What if we were doing a tag listing? And we did a tag listing on a pull-through proxy that would list the stuff on the upstream registry. Or what if you allowed a push-through proxy instead of just a pull-through proxy? So I'm kind of going down that path. And then I started thinking, what if there was a way to reference content within a namespace as you're pulling it? Like today, I could query a pull-through proxy, and I could query proxy.example.org / my repo, and it would pull that image from wherever it's pulling through, and I could try to pull that directly from the proxy. What if I wanted to pass the namespace parameter as something in my Docker pull command or cryo run or whatever command I'm running? and specify the container image in there in such a way that the proxy knows which namespace to talk to, not just that I'm talking to the proxy.
Uh-oh.
It starts going down this whole path, and so then,
It does. You just went down the namespace path. Yep.
well, it's the whole idea of the namespace is that we scoped it very narrowly for just the one scenario that you define the proxy, and it's the same proxy for multiple backstream registries the proxy is talking to. And so you got the NS parameter you pass on the query string that then container D will pass to the registry, then it gets passed to the thing. And I'm looking at, does that make sense to keep in a very narrow scope, or should it be expanded out to a much bigger picture of being usable across other things? With the idea that if it gets expanded out across multiple things, then that plays nicely in the OCI layout that has multiple image exports from multiple repositories all in the same OCI layout. That's my crazy thought process. So I thought I'll bring that to the group, see what folks thought about that. I don't have Rom here to pick on because that would be another person that likes OCI layouts for the back end of a registry. Well, we haven't done much with that namespace pull request. I know there are a lot of people interested in it. I know Derek has probably been too busy to work on it. But yeah, Sajay, the PR with the namespace, I'll copy this over into the chat, goes way back to pull 66 that Derek was working on. And this is supported today in Containerd as best I know. When you pull through a proxy with Containerd, it passes the namespace and says, I'm using you as a proxy, but it is for this other upstream registry. I'm pulling an image from Docker Hub through this proxy, or I'm pulling from GitHub Container Registry or somewhere else.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
All right,
So yeah,
where's
that, what's that, Mike?
I just my wife's trying to get a hold of me. I'm looking for mute. Screen's jumping all over the place.
I'll take screens jumping all over the place over my screens all going blank simultaneously and going, what on earth just happened? We did just have a good thunderstorm roll through last night, so everything's, who knows, in a funky little state. So Sajay, I see you probably scrolling back through that old PR. Any thoughts from your side as to how this would play with some of the proxies and if it makes sense to extend it beyond just that one narrow scope?
There are multiple implementations for pull through, right? And most of these have been server side configurations. The client is never able to say where you want to pull through from.
Most pull-through proxies, I think out there, it's a single registry that it talks to. And so you have to set up a different proxy on a different port or on a different host name for each proxy you want to create. And so the idea of this was that you could have a single proxy that's supporting multiple. And it does work if your runtime is Containerd. Doesn't work for anything else right now. Well, maybe there's some other people that are doing it, but I haven't heard many. But yeah,
I'd be surprised if containers slash image wasn't doing a similar thing.
passing a namespace to all the proxy backends.
Yeah, we could check. I'd be
Yeah.
surprised. It would be such a limiting factor for remember, we need to be able to run the same containers. So
Yeah, but then when you think of like Docker run, if Docker's doing the pull and not Containerd, I don't think they support because they only go to a single proxy. They only proxy images from Docker Hub.
well, I mean, if we're our default host is still Docker IO, which right?
But
You
in the
br-
Docker configuration, there's only an option to specify a proxy for Docker Hub. You can't specify a proxy for any other registry in the
That's
Docker
right.
engine.
And when we make the connection to that proxy, I mean, it's not really a proxy. It's just it's a
It's
map. It's a
another
map.
registry.
It's not right. It's just registry one. When we make that connection, that's when we get the proxy. Just magically happens.
Mhm.
And
But
it's
I
been that
imagine,
way, and we need that at least for Docker schema too, but also I believe for OCI.
yeah,
Yeah,
I imagine there aren't many users out there that are using that want something like a tag listing. But I still feel like if we branch this out a little farther, things get a little interesting here.
yeah,
But the other big thing is a reference today is just my container registry and my tag, registry repo tag or digest. That's your reference. There's no way to reference a proxy with a namespace to an image.
right.
And if there was, that would open up some other stuff for me on the OCI layout side.
Okay. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of value to supporting namespaces in the spec. We've been very specifically trying not to. We would probably have to specify a number of supported namespace, systems, if you will. Docker's is pretty unique. Well, I say unique, but there's a lot of registries that are based on Docker's, registry code. So
Yeah. Saji, I'm looking through this link that you just dropped. Is this for multiple backend registries or only a single registry?
You can have an endpoint configured against per repository pointing to different registries. That's kind of what I think we've seen ECR and ACR and go down the path of. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out where does this, I mean, it doesn't address the problem of credentials, right? Like most of the time you cannot talk to an upstream. If the upstream is Docker, then it's going to be throttled if you don't have a token and things like that. So what's what's the use case is still kind of confusing me. Is it
So
just a client-side proxy?
the use case of pull 66 is that someone wants to be able to specify, here's my proxy for all container image pulls for my Kubernetes cluster. And every pull for those nodes all goes through a single proxy regardless of which backend registry it's talking to.
I see. So it's pretty much a host. I mean, it's almost like an HTTP proxy at that point in time.
In a way, but in another way, it's much more aware that it is talking about container registries and not general HTTP. So I can be a little more intelligent about how it works.
Is the idea for the mirror in the
So I feel like when you're doing a proxy like this, it's more that you're looking at bandwidth management. You've got a large cluster, a lot of machines all going to who knows how many registries, and you just want to reduce the duplicate bandwidth going out of the cluster. But it goes down the path of if we do this, then if we make a way to reference something in the pull-through proxy, then I can reference something in OCI layout similarly and use similar kinds of syntax. And then I can start to use an OCI layout the way that other people use an OCI layout, which is for transport and not as just a reference for a repository. Because right now I treat an OCI layout as if you have a latest tag, there's only one latest tag. And I've got other users saying, I wanted the layout, the latest tag for 3 different repositories because I'm copying images across. I'm using this as a way to move images across the sneakernet. And if you do that with like a Docker export import kind of function or save load, those include which repository the images come from, so you can have multiple repositories all in the same layout. So I'm kind of bridging these two sides of the question, because if I solve it on one side, I can solve it on the other side and get a nicer path that has some consistency between the two.
The NS parameter is still only a request parameter, right? It doesn't say how this can be persisted in any other way. I mean, the point is, if you want to put it on the layout, you still need to define something what the layout would hold.
So that's why I asked the middle question, which is there a way to reference something like a Docker pull command that says, I want to pull this content from this proxy server that's going to this upstream proxied registry? And so is there a Docker pull command or something else I could run that would have that syntax in there, or any kind of command? And so instead of configuring the containerd, Docker, CRI-O, any of the other engines out there that says, I need to specify my proxy in advance, is there a way I could specify it on the command line of, I want to do a pull or a listing or query, anything else to this proxy for a given namespace? What would the syntax of that be? Right now, you've got the registry / repository in a path form, colon and a tag. Is there some other character we would throw in there that says, and here's the namespace? Because the path I see some people going down in this one with what I've got in RegClient today is they're saying, let's just add another character in there. Whenever you see a pound sign, that means you're talking to a namespace. And I'm like, that's great, except you don't have the same restrictions on an OS path that you do on a repository name. A repository name is, it's all lowercase characters. It's just a slash between each entry in there. A lot of special characters aren't allowed. But on a path on a file system, you can put pluses, tildes, all kinds of other characters in there in the file system path. And so as soon as I start taking these characters out and start using them for other things, that now means that people can't use those for the file system. And so if I take characters out, I want to make sure that I'm being consistent across multiple tools and other conventions out there. And so I'm referencing them the same, whether I'm talking to a registry with a namespace versus if I'm talking to an OCI layout. I feel like other folks are like, yeah, this isn't my problem. I don't care.
I'm still trying to, I don't know enough about this, but why do you need the namespace parameter and distribution spec to solve the layout problem is still something I'm not able to wrap my head
So
around.
they both play in a similar space. There's an odd parallelism between the two, because effectively what I'm getting is the same location I'm talking to that then starts to talk to multiple repositories, registries on the back end. It kind of spans out. And so if I'm talking to this single registry server, there's a proxy server, the namespace is, I'm not really talking to that proxy server anymore. I'm now talking to all these other foreign registries out there with all this other content. That's the same way people want to use the OCI layout in some cases. I'm talking to a specific directory. I don't really care about the directory. I care that it's now a storage for content that's on all these other registries out there. And I've just mirrored all this content locally.
Right. So, but we did resolve the fully qualified reference part of the specification, right? And we said that you can do that already with each image having any upstream per se.
You can specify just the tag, or you can specify the fully qualified
Right.
name of a reference in there, and that won't work with a Docker save command. So I'm going to have to still put the other annotation in there to work with other tools. But regardless of that, how do I reference it in a way that is consistent across different tools out there, different things? And so if there's a way for me to say, let me pull this image from a proxy with this namespace, if there's a syntax that makes sense for that, that same syntax could potentially make sense for let me copy this content to an OCI layout in this special repository name.
Do you have a proposal in mind of what you want the OCI layout syntax to be?
I've seen someone say they want to say, I can type it so it makes a little more sense. They're looking for,
Like source reference or something like that?
yeah, path, dir, path. Yeah, still dir, pound, and then they're looking for the upstream repo colon tag. They're looking for something that looks a little like this, where it's OCI dir colon / is kind of my little thing in the front. I think Scopio and some other tools do that as well. It says, hey, this thing isn't talking to a registry, it's talking to something local. They were asking for a pound sign. I don't know how big a fan I am of that, just because I know as soon as you take a character away, someone's going to ask to include that character in the path for other stuff of their own things. I could potentially also see him being after the tag instead of before the tag. But also the upstream repo is a fully qualified, this is a registry / and some kind of repo in there and whatnot. So there's going to be a longer string in there than just that. So you can't just say after whatever the last / is, now you can look at these other characters. You have to look for something in the middle of the string and say, if I see his pound sign anywhere in that string, everything after that is this other thing.
Yeah, separators. I remember like when we had the same similar problem in auras, we just decided to split up the arguments at that point in time and say, hey, this is the actual image reference in the layout. But the layout only still has only one index, right? And
so the layout, it all depends. So here's the challenge. The layout depends on who you're talking to as to what the layout is and how it's used. If you talk to something like BuildX or a bunch of these scanning tools, if they look at a layout, they want to see a single image. They're either outputting a single image from their build or they're importing and scanning this one single image. You give them multiple images in the same layout, they all throw up their hands and be like, oh no, I don't do that. Then you get tools like Docker, save, and load, and they're saying, well, the layout is a transport for us. We're going to take the full image name in there. The layout itself isn't where the image is. It came from somewhere upstream. It was in a registry. We're just copying it into the layout, and then we're exporting it from the layout into some other Docker engine, and it takes that full path. It's not known by layout. And then the third option is kind of what Ram and I do, where we say, well, the layout is just a repository. Copy content in and out, and it can be the back end of a registry, or it can be just another storage point as we're moving content around. And the layout itself is the name of the object. I don't need some external name, whether it's real or just a pseudo name that someone made up. It's, to me, all I care about is the name of the OCI layout and a tag within it. And I don't need that foreign name. So depending on which of these three cases you're using it for, the tooling gets very different in the syntax and the commands you work and everything else. But kind of where I'm going with that is, if I threw this other example in there, just like a Docker pull command, and said I wanted to pull from this proxy for this other image in a different
Why is the
location.
proxy so relevant to how the image is pulled that you want it to be part of the image reference? I'm missing something.
So if you were able to directly pull something like that, I can mirror the image reference for the Docker pull command with the OCI layout command.
Right, but why does the proxy matter there? The proxy is a function of the user and of their environment and of the way that they are pulling the image, not a function of the image itself that should be encoded in the metadata for moving the image around.
So today, without the namespace in there at all, if I don't have that, I can still pull directly from a proxy. I could pull from a proxy and say, pull from my proxy / repo, whatever. And that proxy would see that and it wouldn't know the namespace other than it already knows namespace because it's hard coded with a single namespace. So today already people can pull directly from a proxy without knowing the upstream image name. I thought Tina just dropped on that one. So he's like, that's it, I'm out the door. But I guess where I'm going is it's functionality that exists today already for working with proxies. And so if as we're adding the namespacing functionality in there, would we keep similar functionality that users can directly reference content that they can pull from the proxy?
Not loving it, but it seems like the distribution spec is trying to be a proxy spec as well, right? Which it doesn't do today. So if the use cases that we define, hey, this is how you can build a distribution proxy, then the parameter makes sense. I mean, I think it's good if you want to do it. And with that in mind, if the distribution spec is going to be supporting proxy pull-throughs of multiple upstreams, then we also need to define how the layouts can be used to store multiple upstreams. Is that what is that kind of
That's the bridge
leading?
that's
Okay,
the
okay.
bridge I'm making between the two.
Yeah.
It's
I'm still not convinced that the distribution spec is yet capable of defining a full proxy yet.
yeah. I'm looking to solve the latter problem, which kind of turns the OCI layout. I've removed this issue between the OCI layout where I've got, 3 different use cases out there. I can now merge 2 of those use cases together. And so if I'm able to do that with a layout by saying, okay, there's a way to reference content in multiple repositories or just single one, that solves a couple of users' problems in there. And that same pattern applies to this other one. So that's kind of where I'm bridging the two.
I mean, I think the idea is nice because, like you said, the use cases for your clusters pointing to one proxy might land, but it is a pretty long-term item. I mean, we do have similar requirements where customers don't want to go to multiple DNSs; they all want to go to one. But that's a very security sensitive scenario, but we're not talking about authorization or authentication in the spec, so it's kind of a
He does mention authorization and not intentionally passing authorization.
right. So there is some pre-setup involved that would handle this authorization if you want to. That's still ambiguous in some way, right? You need some
Awareness between the client and the
right,
proxy is required. Yeah, you need to know if you're talking to a proxy.
right.
The flip side, though, is that if you don't set up a single proxy to manage all the requests in a cluster, then that means that every time you support another upstream registry you're allowed to talk to from this cluster, you now need to specify another repositories. That's the case we have today. Every time you want to set up another one of these proxies, you're setting up a new unique one for that one registry. And I imagine that gets a little cumbersome with images coming from all over the place.
Yeah, and your dev flow, what does it look like? Like every time you deploy to the cluster, would they actually have to specify the spec with, hey, this is the proxy for the resource? Is that what you're expecting?
So my expectation for most places is that they will be able to say, pull this image upstream. They don't care about the proxy part that's configured on the container runtime. It's going to be specified in containerd, Docker,
Okay.
pick your runtime out there. And so they don't even know, and the whole runtime just says, hey, I'm deploying this place. And just like I would talk to an HTTP proxy, I'm going to talk to the container registry proxy and get all my images from there. I'm just taking that one extra step there of saying, hey, we can talk directly to proxy today. If we add this feature, we could potentially still talk to the proxy directly today. It would be nice if there was a way to reference that I'm talking to this proxy for this image and being able to pull it.
And as you said, or tag, or yeah.
So I only threw one thing on the agenda, but it was also a bit of a long walk to get people through the whole crazy compopulated logic I was working on. And Ram, you joined late, so you missed the whole adventure there. But it does involve OCI layouts and proxies and registries, so I feel like it's something you might be interested in.
And it's something we need to fix.
Yeah.
It's been there for a while.
So Ram, the TLDR on this one is I've got a user looking for how to use an OCI layout for multiple backend repositories, similar to how you do a Docker save today and you'll save multiple images into a single layout for multiple registries. And so I was looking, well, can you reference that within an OCI layout cleanly? And how would you reference to say I'm copy and paste, or I'm copying this content from this one thing, from this external repository into this OCI layout in a way that knows about it? If there's a way to reference that kind of content, that falls really closely into some of this namespace stuff that we were doing for the proxies. And that was distribution spec pull 66. I'll copy that link back over here again. We were talking about. Thanks, Ajay. So from that pull 66, we were looking at the namespace. We were looking at how you can have a single proxy that can be a proxy for multiple backend registries. And so if you can do that, and if you can do that on the OCI layout side, similarly, those two kind of have a lot of overlap between the two. And so I'm looking at whether there's a good way to have some commonality and some overlap between the two functionalities.
Is there an issue that is tracking the requirements? Man, this is a lot. It's a very loaded requirement, looks like.
It's an old requirement, issue 12.
Okay.
It's our oldest pull request that hasn't been closed yet.
And it's Derek. We should be doing it. I wish Derek was here.
Yeah. So I think it's good. I think for Derek's thing, the path he is taking is he was looking at a very minimal scope in there of how do we solve this problem for this one specific use case. And he wasn't going out in all the different directions that I'm going right now.
Yep. Not trying to define a namespace, allowing you to pass a string.
He was not boiling the ocean of how does this affect everything else we're doing? How do you do a tag listing to a proxy that has this? He was like, no, tag.
He does reference that.
Does he?
But yeah. It's in the. Let me give you the line number.
I was thinking in general, just, he had this thing nicely scoped for this simple problem. And now I'm looking at, okay, how do we do everything else around this? And it gets a little bit more complicated everywhere else. So, but it very much is looking at how does this mirror what's going on with people that are using an OCI layout, not for referencing a single repository, but referencing multiple external repositories they want to copy content into. And if you can reference content on one side, you can reference content on the other side. What does a reference look like? Would you say Docker pull proxy sample.org? Some kind of syntax to say from this specific registry that I'm pulling from the proxy.
Okay, and this looks like there is also some overlap into our CDN requirements. There is some other issue that tracked that.
Oh, do tell.
Okay, I will take a look. I'll need to catch up on this.
What requirements is Cilium looking for that overlaps? I'm curious.
Sorry, Brandon, was it a question for me or for the forum?
Yeah. You dropped this hook. You got me all interested. You said it has a lot of overlap with some of your other requirements that are coming in.
Oh,
So
the CDN, there was a CDN requirement, right? We talked about it last time.
I misheard. I thought you said Cilium. So
No,
CDN, yeah.
CDN. Yeah, sorry. Let me catch up on the issue, Brandon. I think
Yeah.
it's
It's a very old issue, and or a pull request even, and so it's not ready to be merged or approved or anything, but it's just taking that one and saying, how do we start to, does it make sense to expand the scope of this to something that gets some commonality and gets some similarity between all the different users in different cases outside of just this one thing that we were trying to scope this issue to solve. So that's the only thing I threw on the agenda today. We can chat about more interesting stuff.
yeah. I mean, unless somebody's yeah. So remember that I gave a demo about Stacker with SquashFS layers a while back. So now I think at least the last couple of days I was able to generate EroFS layers out of our as a container image. So maybe I will do a small demo next week, trying to bring in a container snapshotter that shows end-to-end for all of this stuff.
That reminds me, I admire your optimism, but we'll probably not be here next week. So week after.
Okay, week after.
Thanksgiving.
All right. Thanks for the heads up.
U.S. Thanksgiving.
I'll include that as a note on this that we are skipping next week and make sure that Jory knows to take it off the calendar.
Okay.
And so I missed the full details there. You're talking about some stuff you're doing in Stacker.
Yeah, Brandon. So the idea was that this is again that OCI image spec 2.0 journey, right? So we want to move away from tar layers. And the idea was that if you have really large images, then yes, we sort of looked at the problem of trying to pull the image in parallel that the spec allows today. So that sort of is an optimization. The next one is to unpack all these layers. So you have to unpack all of them, and then only then can the container come up, right? So the way folks have solved it is using the Sochi index and things like that, where you sort of hide it behind. It's basically fundamentally a TARFS plus fuse and all of that stuff. So the other alternative is to package this as a read-only compressed mountable file system. So that way you just pull that in and you just mount, and then internally whatever the file system needs to do based on the requirements, it will do it. So there is no requirement for fuse, none of that stuff. So the one of the file systems that fits this model is SquashFS, a really old file system. It has got broad support across platforms. I think the more interest is in EroFS. EroFS is a fairly modern one. Android uses it and all of that stuff. So the downside for EroFS is it's not broadly supported. Only Linux supports it. But these are two file systems that are actually great candidates. So Stacker, I gave a demo for this using SquashFS, but I think EroFS is also possible, it looks like. So instead of just giving you a piecemeal demo on just this, maybe it's better to show the end-to-end workflow. So if you have, you create an image, push it somewhere, let containerd pull it, and then launch a container out of it. So that's, I think, and let's see how it goes. So that's
What,
the.
what's your goal in presenting that here? Are you hoping for something to happen at the OCI spec?
Yeah. So I was hoping that we can start looking at changes in image spec, maybe with respect to a different type of image format and things like that. Maybe, I mean, the OCI image spec is pretty open that you can actually populate it with anything you want, but it's something that can sort of influence it, I guess. But we'll see. Let's do the demo and then let's ask questions and let's see how to go forward from there.
Okay, and so that's what you meant by OCI V2 or something?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Again, OCI V2 is not my thinking, right? Alexa and others have already started thinking about this a while back.
Right.
But then now that we have a pain point, an actual pain point with really large, sparse files, images, that is something worth revisiting at this point.
So what's the reason that this can't be done within the current OCI V1
No,
model?
it's
And just
yeah.
add
I
in
think
more
It is being done.
types?
I think it can
It
be
is
done.
being done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
As artifact type, new artifact types,
That's
it is
correct.
being done.
Or just new layer types within an OCI.
New layer types. Yeah, we don't even have to make it because it's a runnable image at that point, potentially. So
It's nice to have a subject reference to an image that already exists that has that extra index. I guess that's one way. You're right. You could just relay out the entire thing, which sort of requires modifications to the client on the push and support at the registry.
right. So that's correct. So from the building and pushing side, I think it's sort of under control. We can actually take any Docker file and make it happen. On the consumer side, we will need changes on. I mean, at least to demo this, I think containerd snapshot is probably a way to go. So that's what I'm exploring. So
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. It's just we don't yet have support for snapshotters from all of the container runtimes. So from their perspective, they may see some of these discussions as experimental. Yeah.
I think it falls into the runtimes and container engines may support scenario. And once you say that, it's nice if you own the full end to end, but as soon as you are an image producer, if you produce content that can only be run on a limited set of container runtimes, that gets a little more complicated.
That makes us as OCI maintainers nervous, because the goal for OCI is to have a compatible specification that allows you to move your images from one platform to another, from one cloud to another, yada yada, right?
But we've got a lot of places in the spec today that say may.
Yeah.
And when you say may, that implies there's going to be incompatibility if people fall on one side or the other side of the may.
I guess the way I'd like to before we do a spec, I know they are also trying to do lazy outside of snapshotters, so it would be interesting to see what their patterns are as well, you know, from the other side of the fence, versus coming in with one, you know, one demo and say, hey, we'll do it containerd's way. Yeah, that's just saying.
Ram, do you have any of this? Is there a place I can look at where you're doing this today?
yes, yes, there is. So let me see. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can. So this is on Stacker. So the Stacker project itself is split as the front end and the back end. The back end is somewhere else. Let me quickly give you the links. Give me 1 second.
You're already working with Derek and crew on the Ordo stuff, on the new file system. Rose. I know I've heard Derek talking about this project you just mentioned quite a few times. So
Lost him.
yeah.
can't open up GitHub and this at the same time.
Just
And he's
Yeah.
back.
Sorry, lost connection dropped there. Give me 1 second. So this is the front end, and the back end is there's the back end. Let me see if I can quickly
I like how you snuck YAML in there.
yes. So
It must be a Kubernetes project.
yeah, it's a CNCF project now, Stacker. We have donated it there. So let me see if I can.
All right, it's an old running joke, JSON versus YAML.
Yeah.
Actually, at the last KubeCon, they they held like a family feud kind of event, and one side was Team YAML and the other was Team JSON. It was funny as heck with Tim Hawken as the moderator.
I mean, the beauty of it is you can be Team YAML on the server and Team JSON as the author, and it just works.
Okay, so let me see if I can show a quick demo of what we have. It's not perfect, but at least so it's a YAML based thing, which is this is the image name, bunch of YAML stuff, and then what actually this is the way you look at it is this is the Docker tag, this is the from, and this is the your run statements, and this is instead of having a run per line, you can basically it's a YAML, so you can basically list of YAML, and you can have things like derivatives. This is the from using chaining, right? So base is the first one, then this is A, that is build from base, B build from base, and so on and so forth. So so you build it like that. You build this thing like this, and what happens is you can sort of get all these images that are these are OCI images now, but the layer type is
Euros.
yes, correct. So
Neat.
so now all of these are become. I know there's some the feedback that you shouldn't have two pluses and all of that. I'll fix all of that stuff. So this is now an EROFS layer from this point onwards. And what happens? The idea is that if you take containerd and say, hey, here is the image, go ahead and sort of quote unquote unpack, mount it. All it needs to do is pull the image and mount it. That's it, using OCIFS. And after that, you just run the container from there. So there is no step of, and these are actual file systems. So you get all the correct file system semantics with permissions, the IDs, all of that stuff, plus the compression, inline compression if it's ZeroFS, SquashFS, plus the ability to just directly mount them, right? You don't have to do anything special, no special magic, and that's it. So if you have a really large image with very few files, which is the typical AI model use case, then you pull the image in parallel chunks, then you mount it and you just run it. So that is the model, and you really do not have to make any changes to the image spec, but maybe the change is, hey, this is something that you need to look at or something like that. So.
Cool.
And the touches are to preload the
Yeah, this. Sorry, what was the question, Mike?
I was just curious that are the touches to preload the root directory so there's no overloading on accident?
Oh, you mean the YAML itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just to show correctness that you create some files and those files show up and things like that. So
because the obviously the Kubernetes could have tried to do a volume mount in some of these paths.
that's.
I was wondering how you resolve conflict.
This was just a demonstration that he could make
Just a
different
demo.
files from
Okay.
different
Yeah.
destinations.
So the purpose of the demonstration is to get all these kinds of questions, and then we'll go fix them.
Okay. Yeah. There's an expected sequence, and I was just presuming that these touches were to actually provide some indicator to the
No, it's,
to the
yeah,
volume
just ask this.
mounting that if that directory already existed, right, that it's going to be overrunning some of the layered content that will be will be pulled lazily.
I think it
There's
could
got to
have
be
also
some.
been, it could have been echo hello image A,
Yeah,
echo
it could have
hello
been
image
anything.
B.
It's just yeah, it could have been anything. Remember, the whiteouts have to care about whiteouts, whiteout correctness, and all of that actually works. So
Okay.
your layers that you add files, delete files, add files, delete files, and so on and so forth. So all of that works because it's a full file system.
Okay.
And that's it. So let me see if I can demo this in about 2 weeks end to end, and let's see how that goes.
Awesome.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Rom. Looking forward to that. And I like seeing an OCI layout.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to have one common format for all lazy loading. I've seen many different implementations, but it would behoove us if we had some way to point to where they're defined. Mostly, I think you're doing a workaround with existing registries, right? You're not requiring any registry side content, right?
That is correct. This is completely transparent, right? So it's an OCI image. As long as it's OCI compliant, you push it in, you pull and mount. That's it. You're done.
Right. So it's a client-only understanding of the tooling that's required to push and pull and resolve the images locally.
It's a different layer media type, different layer content there. And so it's the producer and the consumer and the registry just treats it as a black box.
Right.
I imagine there might be some people that it's not just the runtimes they're going to need to know how to deal with this. It's also going to be the vulnerability scanners, the SBOM tools.
Yeah.
All those
The confidential container pullers inside the VMs and yada. Yeah. They're using GitHub containers image inside of confidential containers, even when they run as a handler within container T. So this kind of stuff would be difficult to implement without also modifying the client implementation inside of images, which would fix cryo, by the way, Ramkar.
Yeah.
So tar can be implemented completely user mode. You're just, a tool is running there and doing its thing.
Yep.
If you use some of these like SquashFS, EuroFS, does that require kernel access to mount the file system?
Yes. So there are two modes. Yeah, both of them, at least in the Linux kernel, there are two kernel implementations, both for SquashFS and EuroFS. So if you want to use it, you can use those. But but there are Fuse implementations for both of them as well. So if you want to just do user mode mount, you can use Fuse mount of those two file systems.
What if you didn't want to mount? What if you just wanted to extract it the way you would extract a tar file?
It's a file system, so yes, there should be a way to extract it if that's what you want.
Copy, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have copy out, kind of both in Docker, Containerd. Everybody's got a copy out of their cache.
Brandon means
Okay,
without creating a container.
Yeah, no container, no nothing. I'm thinking of people that make the vulnerability scanners. I'm thinking of people that do the SBOM generation. All these people don't necessarily want to mount the file system. They just want to inspect the content, and so they're looking for things that run strictly in potentially a restricted environment, don't have access to the kernel, that just want to look at the content directly.
Got it. Yeah, that's a use case, valid use case. Yes, and I believe it should be possible to unpack it.
It'll be interesting. So, all right, we ran up to the end of the hour here with only 2 items on the agenda, and Tianan got away without me asking him about annotations. So this is like a win-win-win for everybody right now.
We have to keep annotations.
Next week we'll be off. As a reminder, I'll make sure the Slack and the calendar and everything gets all those updates. And then we'll be back to hopefully see some more from Rob next time. So thanks, everybody.
Nice
For
demo.
those in the US, have a good Thanksgiving.
Cheers.